Hello, and a big thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Uma Jacob, and I lead programming at India Art Fair. We are so delighted to begin the new year with this very fresh and first of its kind online symposium, Staging the Contemporary, the Next Generation, presented by India Art Fair and Ishara Art Foundation, and generously supported by Shiv Nadar University. After an extremely engaging, insightful, and invigorating first day, I'd love to just welcome everybody and thank you so much for joining us today on day two. We have seen the world transform in the past 2 years, and with this, the need to make conversations and our spaces more diverse, inclusive, and relevant today. Staging the Contemporary is conceived as a new knowledge sharing platform bringing together the next generation of artists, collectives, curators, writers, publishers, and exhibition makers from across South Asian art to deliberate on what they think and identify as key issues, urgencies, and methodologies to help lay the foundation for the art and cultural landscape of our futures. A few house rules to begin with. Please note that this link will remain the same for all three sessions scheduled for today. Each panel will begin immediately after the previous session ends, so please remain logged in if you're planning on attending all sessions today. We encourage dialogue and open conversation in the chat box at the bottom of your screens. You can drop in your questions or observations before or during each session, which will be taken up in the Q&A round that's reserved for the end of each panel. Also, for you to note, every session will be recorded and made available for viewing on India Art Fair's YouTube and social media in a day's time. Yesterday's sessions, in fact, are already up and running and available for everyone to watch on our YouTube channel. We'll share a link with you down below, and it will be available on our Instagram very soon. And if not before, I hope to see you at the India Art Fair taking place now from the 28th of April to the 1st of May 2022. Huge thank you again to all of you for joining us today. And over to the wonderful Sabi Ahmed, who will introduce the day's program of talks.
Thank you, Uma. And welcome everyone to the second day of Staging the Contemporary, the Next Generation. We had the pleasure of attending 3 panels yesterday, and we'll have the remaining 3 for today. For those who missed yesterday's sessions, the recordings have already been uploaded on the India Art Fair YouTube channel, as Uma just pointed out, and we'll be hosting them on the India Art Fair and Ishara websites very soon too. I'm not going to go into a detailed introduction today, but just to highlight a few points for those who missed yesterday on how the symposium has been conceived and a few takeaways from the panels yesterday. The symposium, as many of you might know, brings together artists, curators, collectives, and writers born since the late 1980s. The practices invited for the symposium stem from experiences of this generation that came of age in the wake of accelerated world-changing events, ranging from waves of economic recessions, environmental crises, a new era of World Wide Web, where you don't switch off the internet, personalized devices, the rise of religious fundamentalism and xenophobia in many contexts, and a surge of social and political uprisings that include the Arab Springs, the Umbrella Movement, Black Lives Matter, Shaheen Bagh, various Ambedkarite movements, and Me Too. And in each of these instances, it's impossible to designate these scenarios and movements simply as local or global, as they occupy both registers, urging new ways for us to think about the context of art practice, institutions, and society. The symposium does not answer what is contemporary art or what is new in contemporary art or who are the new faces of contemporary art. Rather, we're looking at what are the milieus of contemporary art. And the invitation to all the panelists was really for several of us to come together and think together to deliberate on the urgencies, methodologies, and infrastructures, as Uma mentioned, that lay the foundations for cultural practices today. Today we're going to have presentations, panel discussions, and conversations that bring together collectives, artists, writers, bloggers, podcast editors, who come with various material, philosophical, and ideological positions, and we hope that with them we'll get to map emerging vocabularies and concepts that set the stage for contemporary discourse. The program explores questions pertaining to how artists and thinkers approach artistic infrastructure, support systems, collaborations, media, public, sites, and a wider historical and geographic contour of their work. The way we designed the panels yesterday and today was possible because of a series of discussions that I had the pleasure of being part of with some of the moderators from this symposium and a few speakers, and I'll name them because I'd like to extend a thanks to them, to Najrin Islam, Samira Bose, Natasha Malik, Annalisa Mansukani, Sarkar Pratik, Pramoda Veerasekara, and Arushi Vats, and all of them really gave valuable inputs into some of the panels, the titles, and the concerns. Today's panels, as you know, we're going to start with collective consciousness, looking at a few artist collectives dispersed in various parts of the subcontinent. And really the question is that what does it mean to envision a collective practice? It's going to be followed by another panel on artistic practices, looking at sites and infrastructures this time. That what is the site of artistic practice today? How are artists occupying, inhabiting, and producing sites through art, not just producing works that can go into existing sites? And the last panel is going to be around text as practice, which looks at not just the terrain of art criticism or art history or art theory, but various expanded arenas in which text and articulations are expressed at the moment, which sometimes occupy spaces such as social media, as well as blogs and podcasts. Yesterday's panel, the last panel, we saw how a lecture performance turned into a book and a book turned into an exhibition. And I want to just highlight a few points or takeaways from yesterday's panels. What I particularly found interesting, and I hope these discussions expand and continue beyond this symposium, is that we were seeing from all of the panels that the sites of encountering art have expanded. We were hardly coming across art galleries as the only thing, and I'm not putting this as if things have shifted away from it, but rather you can see an expansion taking place of the sites where art is experienced or encountered. It's also not just about, say, the commoditization of NFTs or something, of what number or code can be acquired, but how can you redistribute an experience, an idea, and mobilize different people to come together? We also could see a sense of destabilizing of the idea of mediums and sites, where the medium sometimes became the site was sometimes the medium. And so none of these are taxonomical categories that might have been operative and clearly defined before, and they become a little blurry now and are being redefined. And also what we saw quite wonderfully in many of the presentations and dialogues was that a lot of the practices seem to have been defying the logic of scarcity. Rather than producing exclusive, rare objects or rare encounters, there was a lot of multiplicity, of making additions, of really finding ways of proliferation rather than a scarcity to think about art. And in practically all of them, we were seeing somewhat a drive for seizing various means of production. So it's not just about how do I produce a work of art, but how do I also produce the conditions to produce works of art and to see works of art. And so on that note, let me just conclude and welcome all of you. This event, for all of you who have followed it, is also being recorded and is going to be available online. We're not seeing this as a closed-off event. We hope some of these conversations are going to continue in the Indie Art Fair when it takes place in April. We're also hoping that over the summer we can launch a web platform where, through some help from many of you maybe in terms of crowdsourcing, we can put together a cloud of data and resources, mapping various artist collectives, artist publication initiatives, all kinds of platforms that support or are generated by some of these practitioners and more, so that one doesn't just look at these few names, because there are many, many more names, as you can easily imagine. And that's going to happen over the summer, so you will be hearing from us on that. And on that note, let me welcome Nihaal. We're going to have a closing as well, just to thank everyone, so I'm not going to mention those names right now. As you would have also noticed yesterday, the template of each panel seems to be customized. Each of the moderators and panelists wanted to create their own template and how the presentation should take place. And so we're going to see a kind of uneven terrain of landscapes, context, visuals, and voices. Nihaal, may I invite you to lead the first session and moderate collective consciousness. Thank you, everyone, and over to you, Nihaal.
Thank you, Sabi. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the fourth panel under Staging the Contemporary. Thanks, of course, to Ishara Art Foundation and India Art Fair for bringing us all together. My name is Nihaal. I'm an artist based in Bangalore. And although the panel that I am moderating is called Collective Consciousness, I am not necessarily a part of any collective. Although I do work collaboratively with a few friends, with a few artists under a project called Reliable Copy, which if you were in attendance yesterday, you would have heard about through Sarsaja. I just want to say that I'll keep my eye on the chat box. In case I'm not clear or if my voice is cracking, please do let me know. And yeah, so thank you, everyone. And okay, so the format of this panel, I'm going to keep it quite simple. I'm going to have three questions that are for the group, and it'll follow the same order of response. We will have the packet responding first, then Her Pixel Story, then Kaali, then Anga Collective. And I'm going to ask, as Sabi mentioned, I'm going to take off from what he said, and the focus of this panel will be very much the conditions that these collectives make possible. Because none of the collectives gathered here today are necessarily only producing output that are art objects, that are works of art, but also primarily, in my understanding of things, the work that they make is the conditions and possibilities for group activity, but also for production in a lot of different ways. So that's going to be the focus here, and my questions will also be around that. And I hope that we can unpack them together. I'm also going to be mindful of how yesterday we went a little over time. So I'm going to try and keep everything brief, and I would really like to also bring in audience questions at the end, which was also something we weren't able to do yesterday. So I'm going to jump right in. Just at this moment, I would like to ask if my audio is clear and video is clear, and if there's any breaks or... Perfect, thank you. So, okay, our first panelists are The Packet, founded in 2018 in Colombo, and made up of a group of art workers from Sri Lanka. The Packet began as a community of artists and friends meeting together in an apartment, and this has since evolved into a group practice. Instead of speaking at or speaking to, they have been asking what it means to speak from, and what it looks like to do thinking in public. And in our last conversation together, they had also mentioned they see their work as primarily being a conversation. And I look forward to hearing more about that today. Representing them in this panel will be Abdul Halik Aziz, Imad Majid, and Sandev Handi. Our next panelist is Her Pixel Story, a photo collective based in Kashmir that aims to enable an interactive platform for women and non-binary photographers in the region. Their work is primarily in forging alliances and providing guidance, as well as assistance to developing photographic practices. The collective was formed in 2019 by Nawal Ali, Fatima, and Zainab, drawing strength from their informal meetings and photo walks across their city. Their ongoing projects include photo walks, collaborative projects, workshops, and reading sessions. Representing them in this panel will be Zainab. Kaali Collective is a group of women photographers from Bangladesh that together write and rewrite her stories, memories, and contradictions. By nurturing a trusted, brave space with empathy, diverse experiences, and critical understanding, the collective works towards challenging stereotypical and formulaic representations, art production, and dissemination strategies. Interestingly, of the four collectives here today, Kaali is the only one that has a formalized structure as a non-profit trust. And this is a recent development. And I hope that you will talk more about this today, but also about the specific needs that led to this structure to emerge. Kaali was founded in 2018 and has 5 members. Today we have with us Ongma Kaichak and Sadia Mariam. The final panelist in this conversation is Anga Art Collective, initiated by a group of friends who sought to create a space that engaged in critical thinking about visuality and materiality based on the geographical and social landscape of Assam. Having formed in 2010, they are also the longest running collective in this panel. Alongside their collaborations with village communities, academics, and activists on different events and situations, they also delve into self-reflexive questions around studio practice, as well as the nature of the collective through their various projects. Although the collective has 12 core members, they maintain a fluid structure where individual and collaborative practices go hand in hand. We will be joined today by Dharmender Prasad and Dhrubajit Sharma, who will tell us more about Anga. Just another side note, while I enter the first round of questions, there'll be a slideshow playing alongside each it's not a presentation, none of the panelists really have a presentation, but there'll be some images that you see, and it'll correspond to the collective that's speaking. And okay, so we have an order in place: Packet, followed by Her Pixel Story, followed by Kaali, followed by Anga. And this is just so that there's a clarity of communication. Since there's so many of us, we have an order to follow. My first question is a little basic perhaps, but maybe it'll help ground, or rather build the groundwork for what is to come. And my first question is, what do all of you define as collective work? Or rather, what is it that you do together? And we can start with the packet.
Hi folks, my name is Sandev. One part of the packet. I just want to check to make sure that everyone can hear me and I'm clear. I'm in a less than ideal space to have a conversation, so I apologize for some of the noise and things that you might pick up. So I'll try to keep myself on mute. I guess the question of, what does it mean to work collectively, I think, or what are the conditions that have arisen from that? I think for us, a big question that, as Nihaal mentioned, first of all, thank you, Sabi, Nihaal, and Uma for having us here. I think the question, as Nihaal mentioned, we started meeting at an apartment where some of us live together every week, just to kind of cook together and talk together, and towards realizing perhaps work together. What we later realized as we were kind of working and continued to work is that we were working in a kind of undercommons within which once we had language for it, we understood that maybe thinking about the undercommons is the conversations, the learning that happens outside the classroom, that happens when one goes on a walk, what happens when you are spending time together with people and so on, and the conversations you have together and the things you make and think together. And so the packet really kind of came together, or is kind of retrospectively, we're understanding it as a kind of practice in the undercommons. And since then, I think we've kind of evolved into various different things. But I think to speak about us as a collective is always still a tough thing for us, because we're not even sure if we're collective. We work collectively. And one of the things that I think has made us work collectively, or the conditions of working collectively, is simply thinking about being in a space in which, say there are museums and art exhibitions and galleries and art schools and places in which you can go to gather inspiration, to think together, to see together, to have conversations and have all these discourses. And in Colombo and in Sri Lanka in particular, kind of feeling and noticing a lack of it. And feeling like, okay, where is the spaces in which we can be inspired, where we can have these conversations, where we can go and visit together and think together in these kind of public spaces. And so with the lack of those kind of public spaces, what essentially happened for us is the dinner table and the internet became the place in which we would go to inspiration, for questions, for new ideas, to talking to each other, to sharing what we were thinking about and exchanging and learning and growing together. And so dinner table sort of became this place in which the dinner table and the internet replaced the museum, and it replaced the art gallery, and it replaced the symposium and the conference and so on. So that's really something that began to kind of frame and kind of contextualize how we would work collectively, is simply kind of cooking together and having conversations and so on. And one of the things that essentially emerged from that kind of collective practice of just simply being together being friends and eating together meant that we started meeting once a week to realize an art book, where, every week we would come, we would have dinner, and we would just talk about what was on our mind, share some of the things that we've been working on and thinking about, and trying to think about what would it mean to think about all of these conversations and put them in a vessel of an art. And so one of the first books that we had thought about and worked towards was this book that was called The Packet. We weren't kind of an official body, or we weren't even calling ourselves The Packet. The book was called The Packet. And once that started coming into being, there were so many issues with funding and kind of realizing that project. And what we did is we simply started an Instagram account, and simply were like, okay, we need to start an Instagram account and share some of the work that we are, some of the work that we're making, or at least bring people's attention to that we are present. But the book hasn't come out, so we just started shit posting really on Instagram. And what emerged from there was this kind of accidental kind of group practice on Instagram, which then turns into people referring to us, this group of friends, this group of people, as the Packet. Since then, though, the Packet has moved between, it started with a group of 8 of us, and it since moves between 4 and 24 people. So it kind of varies and moves in and out. And one of the other projects that we had worked on, really to think about conversation as practice, is to think about bring a group of artists together and think about, okay, what does it mean to be in conversation? What does it mean to share? So in late 2019, early 2020, what we ended up doing is we brought a group of people together. There were 14 people all together, and the lockdown hits. It was a project designed to, all about dinners, all about being together. So the group was really wondering, okay, how do we stay in touch? How do we keep in conversation? And we presented nothing too particularly revolutionary. It was just thinking, okay, maybe what if we start chain mails? So essentially we started 14 chain mails, and where each person was asked to respond to a mail that they received from another person in 48 hours. And there were 14 of these kind of threads moving around all together. And what emerged from that, we continued that kind of chain mail thread for about 2 months, I think, changing every 48 hours. And then we had a publication that emerged out of that, which was Mathematics, which is the catalog of all these emails that had been shared and exchanged between these 14 people. So thinking about collective practice, thinking about conversation, I think it's really kind of finding a place for us to be together, to talk over the dinner table and over the internet and over emails and chain mail, and think about what can emerge in the process of conversation, with maybe a lot less focus on the output. Thanks.
Kaushal, I think you have to mute your audio. Thank you. Sandeep, do you want to continue, or shall we move to her pixel story?
Oh, good on my end.
So we have her pixel story next, and Zainab.
Hi Nihal, hi Sabi, thank you for the introductions. So yeah, I'm Zainab from Her Pixel Story. We are a collective from Kashmir, and we are an all-women collective and women and non-binary collective. So how we actually met each other is that I think for Her Pixel Story to come together, it was more like a matter of urgency, where I and my other friends, Nawal and Dufak, we photographed together, and we realized that we need to do this together very often, because given how the situation here in Kashmir is, that we always felt safer when we were doing things in a group. And taking that idea to, kind of establishing that idea, we created this Instagram page called Her Pixel Stories, which kind of was a platform for us to announce and tell other Kashmiri women to join us. And that is pretty much how it started. And we first met, we just did an open call for a photo walk, and then we had about 12 to 13 women who were passionate about photography joining us and attending our sessions. So we just came together, and we used to go out for photo walks in public spaces. And that kind of then intensified into something more structural. We started having 2-day photo meet sessions, which were more like a photo walk on day one, and on second day we would all print the best of our photos that we had shot on day one, and then we would sit together and discuss all of these photographs. And like here we were all kind of exploring, or there would be projects like known unknown, where we would, in attempts to photograph each other, also try to know about each other, that what are our interests, or just to kind of get that bonding in the collective. That's pretty much how we started. And first of in the very initial years, like in 2019 and 2020, we were kind of not very consistent, and we didn't even have an established space where we could do these events. So it was mostly done in public spaces, like in gardens or in parks, or we would meet up in cafes. But as we kind of grew in our practice, we came to know about one of our like friends, who is a Kashmiri Pandit. He had his house here, and he threw open his house to us, where we could have these sessions where we could kind of sit together and chat and kind of go over photo books and everything. So that's pretty much how we all kind of came together and realized that it was easier for us to work when we were all together, especially in a place like Kashmir, where it's like you have to fight patriarchy on every level. First of all, there is the state patriarchy, and then the patriarchy within our homes. Even like, if you ask me about how many women photographers are in Kashmir, although even globally the numbers of women or non-binary being in the field is very less, in Kashmir it's even, I mean, it's handful. Maybe I can only name up to 5 or 6, and that would be it. So yeah, we realized that there was this vacuum that we somehow had to fill, and we needed to create our own spaces, and hence we came together, and we have been like trying and attempting to create those spaces for ourselves since 2019.
Thank you, Zainab. Kaali Collective.
Hi, Nihaal and Sabi. I am Anga, a member of Kaali Collective, joining from Dhaka. First of all, thank you for inviting us for this online space. So I might be starting from what we are doing collectively currently. So we have a small physical space now. So we started growing plants together, watering them, sweeping floors are like our part of our daily routine right now. So 2018 was the year, as Nihaal said, we formed a Kaali Collective, but the notion of creating a space to give voices for our thoughts goes beyond that time. The consciousness of this notion kicked in when we were actually studying photography at the same institution, where we all met and solely going through similar experiences, that there is tiny window of opportunities to open up ourselves, especially for women in every aspect. Also, the paths we have been shown was very directional, or to be honest, it's a very macho world we were seeing. After that, there's a long period of time went by when life happened. Like we were busy with doing our jobs and connected with different fields to survive. So the reality checked in, we got detached. I think the year 2018 was very important for us to, because at that time, from July 2017 to 18, nationwide, we went through lots of happening incidents like Rohingya influx and road safety protests by the students going on. And parallelly, you can see that medias run by the governmental bodies were streaming other irrelevant news to cover up the weekly, condition of socio-political climax. At that particular time, again, we felt the urges and needs to recollect ourselves and to revisit our thoughts that we had. Um, the Kaali's members are from different socio-cultural backgrounds and also different parts of Bangladesh, with individual personalities, thought processes, and also different perspectives. Combining that individual perspectives, we create an energy that makes us to see matters in layered ways, more aware of our surroundings, and also grow as a human being. Publications or any other form we might take as an expression tool for our works or initiations, we try to channel that energy. The collaboration with the Thuma Collective was a milestone for us to realize, to engage with that energy. I don't know if you guys saw the publication called Bridging the North. Is a keeper actually of our friendship at the troubling time, and when we differ as well, even when we differ, as well as realization of our collective internal synergy. That's all. Nihaal, to you.
Thank you. Shall we move on to Dhruv and Dharmender of Anga Collective?
Thank you, Nihaal and Subi, for this wonderful thing. So, in case of Anga, before becoming a collective or collective situation, we started meeting in an institution, the Guwahati Art College, and from 2005-6 onwards, we started working together, and we started developing a sweet critique of the institution, and those things resulted the different kind of actions and activities. Like we started working in the outdoors and started working in the group, and started organizing ourselves. And like we also rented 4 rooms in the southern part of the Guwahati, where we started doing studio practice. And from there we started also moving to the breaking that idea of the studio practice, and started also connecting with people and in the locality, and started making street exhibitions and different kind of initiation which connects us to the community. And I feel that informality is the one of the important character to really define our collective, and thinking together, which brings different kind of processes, which resulted the different kind of forms, like pushing individuals' practices through collective discussions, and developing overlapping the individuals' practices and the collective practices, where there is no line. It's a very different and very thin line that we can define, like what is collective and what is like individual practice. So in our scenario, the idea of the individual practice and the collective practice basically gets blurred in all the cases, and that's how also, like, because we locate at different places in Assam and also outside of Assam, and these locations and the networks between these locations also work as the site of the collective and the collective energy. So these are also very important in like reaching out to the communities, because some of people locates in Guwahati, some of people locates in Dibrugarh in Upper Assam, some people are in Delhi, some people, I also go to Bihar sometimes. So, and the networks which brings connects these places also becomes a collective rather than like 10 or 12 people working together. So this also we see as a site of possibility, and there are inputs, sharing, debates, and contradictions which come through different kind of projects. And there are also individual goals, and also there is a contemplation, and there are interests which also comes here and define the idea of the collective. And I also want to talk about the notion of the greed, which basically propagated by the social institutions, and how it's make a collective fragile always. So the notion of the greed and the practice of the greed in the larger society and in the institution, especially how the pedagogy pedagogical institutions, cultivate the idea of the grid or consumerist attitude. And in all these things, like we are functioning and how we are like, facing these kind of challenges. And apart from like many things, we are working here through No School. We are developing a mobile library, and we are connecting to the village communities, and also exploring materials, other materials which is very much geographic specific. And there are like river networks which also gives the idea of the flow and the flux, which we want to like explore in our idea of like pedagogical forms that we want to practice. So like there are different kind of like layers and things and conflicts that we come from, and we manifest ourselves in terms of practice and in terms of collective. Yeah.
Thank you, Dharminder, and thank you, everyone. That was really a great start. And I think we all have a better sense of what it is that you do now. And my next question, again, is a bit broad. And maybe if it's too broad, we can come back to it in the audience Q&As. But my question really is, what are the conditions and structures around you, whether geographical or political or personal, that make this kind of work possible? And in turn, what are the structures that this work then results in? And just to give you an example of this, and none of you have to follow necessarily the examples I throw back at you, but the packet talked about the dinner table. And that could be, in my reading, one of the infrastructures that makes the work possible. Or platforms like Facebook and Instagram, where both the packet and her pixel story kind of used as a founding moment. It could also be the non-profit model that Kaali is now moving towards. Similarly, her pixel story is moving away from, because it will just result in increased surveillance and scrutiny in a place like Kashmir. In the case of Anga, it could be the city, it could be the geography of Assam. So I hand it back over to you. We can proceed in the same order and begin with the packet.
Thanks, Nihaal, and yeah, thanks for having us. My name is Halik from the packet. Well, I feel like, yeah, I think Sandeep covered a lot of these aspects in his great introduction to our practice. But maybe if I was to add a few things, yes, the dinner table becomes a really important site for us. And I feel like maybe one thing sort of like, which is a reason for that, is perhaps the need for a sense of community within the arts that all of us sort of felt, So the initial group that came together were all sort of like practicing as artists in certain ways. We were all engaging with institutions. But I think there was always this common sense of alienation that was felt, where I think there was a consensus that there was a shape and a form of things that we could do within institutions and that framework, but there was something sort of like left out that we couldn't quite grasp or capture. And I think that was, we started to capture that through sort of like initiating togetherness in a sense. And I feel like what Sandeep was talking about in terms of the undercommons was interesting to us. But of course, this is the language that we found later on to describe what we were doing through reading people like, Morton and Hani and all these things. But what we were trying to do is sort of like initiate this togetherness, just being together, and then maybe harnessing things that came out of it into something like a collective practice. But also, I think I feel like are still somewhat confused about who we are as a collective or as an organization. And I think there's also something that we appreciate and like about ourselves, and sort of also defines who we are in a sense, that there isn't and never has been this need to continue and to be, ossified forever in a sense. It was always this temporary space that came together that kept getting extended and kept going on. And we've kind of like been very comfortable with that process and really found that to be a nurturing space. And I think still it's a very open-ended journey for us. And I think that's also reflected in the fluidity of members that we have who keep coming in and going. And also I think the fluidity of the work that we do. And I think maybe this is another point that is interesting to touch on as it's like an enabling factor is, I think that there was a sense of, like not wanting to speak to the world at large, or in our case, I feel like there was a sense of us as being Sri Lankan artists of the post-war sort of milieu, somehow being expected to speak to that context in a lot of the work that we did. And I think there was a resistance to that. Not that that does not emerge in the work that we do, but I feel like, we say that we like to speak from and not speak to, because I think we all are sort of have a bit of resentment of the fact that maybe it's only the sort of like the Western artist who is allowed to speak to universal human existence as such, and these broad sort of like based ideas and conversations. And I feel like we were coming together to also include that in what we could say and how we were going to say it, right? And I feel like all of us engaging in multiple mediums found the internet to be a really fluid space for us to do that with. So a lot of our work has been influenced by conversations online. And one of the main ways with which we keep this discourse alive is, I guess, through our Instagram account. And I guess that's one other mechanism which kind of sustains us, because there are at any given point from about 4 to 8 people running the same account. And what happens is you have this continuous stream of content that's uploaded onto our stories. And it's not really a planned stream of content. It's just coming from multiple different spaces and places. But we find all these interesting connections and sort of like narratives that emerge in that process. And I feel like this is sort of like how we've been working so far. So really sort of like having community and conversation as a basis, also as a result of a lack of these kinds of spaces for independent artists in Sri Lanka, I feel, to sort of like engage around on these conversations, and then sort of like seeing what emerges out of that process, and then these things that emerge and essentially become maybe the products of this and the products of our process, in a sense. Imad, is there anything else you'd like to add on that?
I think you covered it pretty well. I think the thing about the Sri Lankan art scene is we're so sort of stuck in this post-war that any kind of discursive practice becomes then confined by those conversations. And if you want to really speak about things that are perhaps more intimate, if you want to take a more playful approach, there aren't many discursive spaces for that. And I think that's really something that we as a collective are able to hold space for, and to speak sort of independent of institutions and really speak from our own experiences. And what's really been enabling of that is, for example, the few who were living together in the apartment and then inviting the others over for dinner. It really fostered the sense of friendship and community that allowed us to sort of think and talk through together these various interests that we had that we would eventually find intersected and had different ways of informing each other. And being able to explore the intimate and the playful is not really something you can do even in a panel like this or a symposium and all these formalized structures. And yeah, it really comes back to the dinner table again. That's the primary infrastructure. Beyond that, of course, we've tried, we have our Instagram page, and then there is the publishing work that we're doing, but it all really comes from conversation and being able to hold space for each other and our complexities.
Thank you so much, Halik and Imad. Shall we go back to Zainab? And Zainab, I feel that perhaps there was a part missing in the slide presentation. So maybe Sabi will pull that up now. And Zainab, you can continue with your response. You're on mute, Zainab, sorry.
Yeah, so sorry. Yeah, so in response to that, I think the political situation in Kashmir has always made things impossible for us to do than actually create that possibilities for our ideas to be executed in a way. There is like, I mean, just to mention it, that there's a lot of self-censorship, first of all, because of the political scenario in Kashmir. So we kind of even like self-censor a lot to not invite any kind of trouble or surveillance from the state, like you mentioned already. And that's also one of the reasons that why we are not registering ourselves with the state, because the experiences of the other organizations who are already registered tells us that it might invite a lot of surveillance. And also, I think in the context of politics, the biggest setback to our collective was in the same year when we actually founded it. So it was back in 2019. And her pixel story came around in about, I think it was March or April. And in August 2019, the Article 370 was abrogated. And because of that, Kashmir was thrown into incommunicado. So for about 145 days, we had no communication at all, neither phone calls nor internet. Even the landlines were kind of suspended, and then it was phase-wise, it was open. Like the landlines were open in a month, and then the calling was resumed in about after 100 days. So was a time for like 5-6 months we could not recover from that loss. Like even in the beginning, even as we had begun to kind of organize these events, which were for women, be it photo walks or photo meets, it kind of all. I mean, there was a total vacuum even for us. Her Pixel Story Instagram page was a platform where we would post about our stories, or we would post about the work that we used to do. But with the clampdown on internet, that again became impossible. So yeah, it's kind of, it was difficult because of that. And then we were thinking about ways to navigate through internet lockdown. And this was when we came to realize that maybe we should, we came to realize that Kashmir is a place where maybe a photo book library is something that is more needed than it is anywhere else, because like with the onset of internet, or with everything being on web, it's easier for us to access the visual material. But for Kashmir, a place where it kind of goes into these long internet sieges, which kind of last for months, we realized that we need to have an offline space. So we decided that gradually and slowly we'll kind of try to build this photo book library, where we could kind of have a space where we all meet and we all kind of engage with that visual material, even when we do not have access to internet. That's about it.
Thank you. Kaali Collective next.
Hi, my name is Sadia. I think for us it was interesting to, if we try to look at our space as a mental space, because first and foremost, we started to meet in the streets, and then staircases, and then tea stalls. So I think the key factor which led us to form as a collective was built in the street, was the conversation and dialogues and observations in the streets. But of course, we are now registered as Trust, which is a very formal entity to work as a collective, because you can't register as a collective or a group in the law of this country. So you have to form a foundation, or kind of trust or anything. So we thought the trust is kind of, like it has many advantages, like it is only the agreement between the trustees, which is the members of the Kaali. And then the income is generally taxed as income of an individual. The structure is, though feels like complex, but for us it was less. It has less surveillance, like a foundation or a company. And the flexibility is there is flexibility of distribution distribution among beneficiaries. So and I think for us it was interesting to decide to be as a trust. It has had to go a long conversation, because we did not want it to formalize as an entity. But what makes us to do that is because we felt like to access in any corporation or any kind of, like if you want to work with NGOs, if you want to work with any agencies, if you want to work with, to have kind of to get access to any information, you have to register as something. So that is why we built as a trust. But there is always for us, it's not, as we are very flexible as a team, and we are not really if we feel it's not working for us, there is always streets and there is always tea stalls for us to be back.
Thank you, Sadhya. And over to Anga Art Collective.
Yes, thank you, Nihaal. I'm Dhruvajit Sharma from Anga Art Collective. So in case of Anga, if we talk about the conditions and the structures we are working on, say the geographical location where we reside, it's politically and ecologically very turbulent, and there is pedagogy or structure. There is we see very kind of not much initiative to engage with all these issues, and it's the whole art institution and as a collective we essentially think about our locality and where we reside, and ground which is ecologically and politically turbulent. So in this ground to function as collective, and so where there is no structure, so the structure is very modernist, where only kind of they worship individual. So in that kind of structure, how we function as a collective, which has a different interest. So we have started officially one project called No School from 2019, but this whole process began earlier, without naming it at No School. So individually and gathering with 2-3 members, like Dharmender sometime in doing it, had done in Bihar, and I personally did in my place Nalbari. So we have been doing different kind of workshop activities. So we are more focused into how to develop a kind of practice locating in this ground, and when this practice will how to engage with the issues, current issues, political issues, historical issues. So this No School kind of project we had started before without realizing it as No School, but in 2019 we officially think we have been doing this activities as in without individually and sometimes in 2-3 groups. Then as a collective we think we need some serious kind of engagement. So then we started this initiative No School in 2019, and the first workshop No School we did in Dhemazi. So this as I mentioned before, there is no structure to support this kind of practice. So in this whole work till now is voluntary. So we the last workshop we did in Dhemazi was in a school named the Vidyadaya Living School in Hubahi. So that person who developed this school, Pranjal Buragoha, he already developing some kind of alternative learning. So we heard about that and we became interested, and then we we contact him, and this some kind of logistic support he gave us, and then we went there and we did that workshop. So so this if Dharmendra can add more into this.
Yeah, like as Trojit mentioned that we started to find out different kind of conditions and different kind of situations where we can continue our practice and engage with individuals and people from civil society, which can become the support of our collective dream. So apart from this mainstream structures that exist in quote unquote in modernist sense, even pedagogical structure, family structure, all kind of structures, what are the other structures that are there that are more fluid, which can have this energy of collectivity, can also support our collective dream, and we can, through this networking, as Dhruva mentioned, through the network of going and looking for another person who has the similar kind of dream of building alternative pedagogy, or some other people, or forest situation, or river situation, or other or some situation in the orality, or things that exist in different forms in the life, can becomes the situation. From there we can find different kind of possibilities of collective engagement, which can push our dreams and idea of this sustaining collectivity. So in terms of condition and infrastructure, these things are very, very, very wide, and we see our location as not as periphery, but as center, because of this kind of possibilities and this kind of conflicts. Yes.
Thank you, Dhrubajit and Dharmender. I think, so we have 15 minutes left, and I originally had one more question, but we also have many questions from the audience, so maybe we should move there. I'm going to do something a little bit, I don't really know how to put it, but I want to ask my question anyway. And if anyone from the audience also wants to hear a response to this, maybe they can pass it back on as a question in the audience session. I wanted to address the elephant in the room when it comes to collective practice, but also production, but also organizational work, which is the question of funding and where money comes from for all of these projects, but also questions of how it's funded, what kind of fundraising activities happen, are people employed elsewhere, is it a personal fund that also supports the collective work? So that's my question, but maybe we'll just hold on that and come back to it if there's still a few moments later, and maybe open out right away to the audience. I'll read out, just for the ease of communication, all the questions, and we can go one by one. The first question is, and anyone is free to answer in this round, unless the question is particularly pointed towards any particular collective. So the first question is, what's the difference between artist groups and collectives? Does anyone have a clear answer to this?
I think in the case of the packet, it's been interesting because very early on, how we sort of thought of ourselves was a group of art workers. And we kind of came together to create this book, and each of us were creating these individual zines that were coming from this collective conversation that we were having, but were very much situated in our own practices. But now, as our practice has sort of evolved, we've come together to work collectively, even at arriving at form and thinking of how to kind of create forms that hold space for each of our expressions. And I think at that point, we began thinking and working more in a sort of collective approach, as opposed to just, each artwork being a group exhibition or such. And I think as far as the packet goes, that's one way that we've been able to kind of differentiate between the two.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to answer that as well, or do we move on to the next question?
Yeah, like in case of Anga, we started as a group because we met in art college. Then friendship began to happen, and then slowly, like we realized that we should like formalize this group. And then in 2010, we were not collective. Like it was only the 4 rooms that we used to share and do practice. And then then we started off like because of this exposure to contemporary art and all these things, the collective, the idea of the term collective comes from there, but the attitude of the collective is there in the society. So it's a combination of 2 things, and in that particular combination, the group is also very important. The notion of group is also very important. So we see that in that way.
Thanks, Dharmender. And what you said about the attitude resonates well with the next question we have from an anonymous attendee. I would love to hear more about the idea of defining or not defining the personality of a collective and how that may connect to ideas of individual and collective practice. Who would like to take this one on? If there's no answer for this, we can come back to it at the end and see if maybe there's an answer then.
Yeah, I think with the packet, it's interesting because people who follow us often are very confused as to who's saying what, because, it's so many people sharing an Instagram account, sharing all these impressions about things and even perspectives. And often even I would look at the packet stories and be like, oh, I have no idea who that is. So it really resists this idea of these individual personalities in a sense, but it also allows space for that. So we become this really sort of amorphous personality that's constantly shifting. The weights are constantly shifting. So it's hard to pin down what is the personality as such of the packet. But there are still certain attitudes and ideals that we come together around, which is this idea of sharing in an intimate way, in a playful way. It still manages to hold space for a lot of different personalities.
Thank you, Imad. The next question is again for the packet and has to do with how many members form the collective. Sometimes your member count ranges from 4 to 24. It's astounding to have so many types of artistic and creative energies. Please tell us more about how to engage with so many energies and hold space for them as well. Thank you. This is from Charlene.
I can answer that very quickly, which is it's never at 1.24 people because you can't. It feels like you can't and make sense of all those energies. But it really means also that you're strategically pulling in people into the conversation. So sometimes it means that 2 people are doing all the administrative work, are making sure that everything is set up so that all people contribute to are in smaller spaces, in smaller conversations, or we're inviting people to kind of sit together. But the contribution, it's kind of broken up, even though at one point there might be, say, 14, 15 people involved.
Thanks, Sandev. And the next question, now the packet will not answer this question because they already have answered it by saying that their name came from the first project, the publication project. But I would like to ask the other three collectives about how they chose their names. Maybe we'll start with Kaali Collective and then Her Pixel Story and then Anga.
I think it was quite, for us, it was quite obvious because we thought Kali is the goddess of time and change and destruction and also creation. So for us, it was, I mean, the name first came out of Bon Bibi and then Kali. Because we thought as a character, we also kind of encompass all these characteristics, but also has a diverse. Kali has diverse meaning because Kali also in Bangla, in Bengali, it's ink, which also led to the publication or any kind of writing. And also Kali means Kalo. It's also is a black. It's also black. So it's interesting how the meaning can shift, can have different interpretations in a different course of time.
Yeah, so for us, I think our name is something that we at Collective still keep fighting about. We are a collective which is kind of still not satisfied with the name that we have, and we often get asked this question that so we are a collective which is only open to our focus is only the Kashmiri society, and we are only open to taking Kashmiri women and non-binary on board. We don't want collective to expand and bring in other nationalities. So we often get asked that why isn't the name Kashmiri, and I don't know, it's something that we still keep discussing. We have had rounds of discussions, I think, every now and then about renaming the collective. But how this name came about was that it was very random. We just wanted to start with something, and we just suggested Her Pixel Story, and it's for us, it's a name that has kind of stayed. And yeah, that's about it. But now when we kind of refer to the extended members in our open calls or anything, we use the term Hamshiras, which is actually a Persian word and means sisters. So we are thinking of kind of renaming it on those lines. But yeah, it's the work that doesn't stop, but we can always kind of go back to having fights about what really we should rename the collective to.
Anga?
Yeah, for us, when we gave this name back in 2010, so now it's hard to recent kind of a mythological kind of as Anga Rajya. So for us, it was back in 2010. We didn't give much thought to it because the whole process is kind of.
I'm sorry, you're cracking up a bit, Rubajit. Dharmender, would you like to answer this if Drupajit is facing network issues?
Yeah. Yes. So as Rajit said that the word Anga is basically it's basically in Hindi it's a body part, and so it's more of an being part and a part. It also gives an indication of certain historical mythological location of a particular and it's also about what we conceive now, because the whole process was very accidental and spontaneous. Like we cannot give a logical answer that why we called ourselves Anga or why the name of the collective is Anga, but it's more of like in building up connections and looking beyond what we are, and enrich to the different people and connect. And so it's more of like an also be part of a very location specific, like a body part or something like that. So yeah, that's the thing.
Thank you. So we're at 5 minutes left. Actually, we've crossed the time and we'll extend for 5 more minutes if everyone's okay with that. There's a few more questions to cover, which we won't be able to get into. 2 of them are for the packet and 1 is for Kaali and her pixel story. So perhaps all of you can take that forward individually with the people that have asked the questions. The last question I will propose for today is from Shazia. It seems like most of the collectives work with a fluid structure of persons involved. For example, in Packet's case, from 4 to 24 people. How do you manage to ensure that these spaces are safe, that safe spaces are maintained, or maintain the reasons why the collective came out in the first place through the fluidity? Perhaps again, it'll be good to start with her pixel story and Kaali, because part of what you do is also to create a safe space, a place where the participants can be comfortable and express freely.
Yeah, so I think for us, I mean, it's of course not always a hunky-dory to maintain. We also like within the group, there are a lot of fights about certain things, even sometimes about the color of the poster. Something as banal as that is what keeps us fighting. But then, yeah, it's always like why the group came together in the first place is because we realized that we need to work together and we need to reclaim those spaces together. And it would be easier to do that than to do that in our, like, there is an individual fight and then there is the collective fight that there is for that space to be reclaimed. And I think that's pretty much something that every woman that we have met on our photo walks or every woman who is now a part of our pixel story realizes. So this is something which is where we are on the same page, like all of us face equal and we face that equal suffocation in terms of the state patriarchy which is there. So to fight it also like has to be there, and it's just that kind of keeps us going, that we need to reclaim that space. It's pretty much that where we all are on the same page.
Yeah, I think for us as well, it is a lot of debate, a lot of fighting, and of course, putting forward our own vulnerabilities, problems, emotional complexities, contradictions, and also the failures, the errors we are making together. We are like, we kind of right now, we call it a brave space because we think we also criticize ourselves as a collective self, what we are building together, whether we are questioning ourselves, what we are not looking at, and are we creating the comfort bubble which we already criticize, and also the circle of making us and others, because the governance system of our country is complete. It's a joke, and if we play the same joke, there is no need to work as a collective.
Thank you. I wonder if the Packet and Anga also want to respond to this, but no pressure also, because we are way past time. Yes, no? Okay, we'll call it a day then. Thank you everyone for such an engaging conversation. And of course, we will share everyone's contact details on the chat, so anyone is free to get in touch and take these conversations forward. But yes, thank you.